All right, I just wanted to welcome you all to the first event of the semester. My name is Catherine Siskanik, and I am the events coordinator for the Economics Society. Just really quick, we have some papers in the back from the Cato Institute and the FFF, if you're interested for after the speech. And I also wanted to extend a special thank you to the FFF for this event. We really couldn't be doing this without them. So, so I'd like to introduce Bart Fraser, who is for the FFF. So.
How you guys doing? Well, believe it or not, this is the third year that we're starting our Economic Liberty Lecture Series here. We do this in conjunction with the GMU Economics Society. We simply could not do it without them. If there are any new students here, freshmen or any other students who are not members of the club, I highly recommend you guys join. It's filled with a bunch of energetic guys who are really serious about both economics and the ideas on liberty. And if you're here, you obviously love the idea of liberty, and there's really no better home for you at GMU. So I highly recommend you guys join it. If you're not familiar with the Future Freedom Foundation, we are a nonprofit libertarian foundation whose mission is to spread uncompromising libertarianism to Joe Sixpack, the average guy. We're not a policy institute. We're not trying to influence lawmakers. We're going after your parents, essentially. And we do it through a variety of methods. We do it through our print publication, Freedom Daily. It's available for free up in the lobby there. You can grab all the samples that you want. We also do it on the internet, obviously. It's probably our main venue for educating people. For instance, all the videos from this lecture series are free for the viewing up there. If you go to our homepage and go to the conference classroom, you'll see all the videos from this lecture series. And we're also going to be starting next lecture live streaming. If you go to ustream.com and to the Future Freedom Foundation site on Ustream, you'll be able to watch it if you can't make the lectures. Tonight's topic is immigration, and there's probably no more divisive of an issue in the libertarian movement anyway than immigration. And I am not here to persuade you one way or the other. There are better people here to do that tonight. But I will at least state the foundation's stand on it, the FFF stand. And that is basically a property rights issue, and that the state really has no business in it. If an individual is not violating anyone else's rights, the state has no business in that relationship. And if I lived on the Rio Grande and I had a Mexican neighbor across the river who I wanted to invite for dinner, the state really has no say in that. I should be able to invite whoever I want to my house. So without further ado, Bryan Caplan is our speaker tonight. He is a professor of economics here at GMU. He is an adjunct scholar at the Cato Institute. His articles have appeared in the American Economic Review, the Economic Journal, the Journal of Law and Economics, Social Science Quarterly, the New York Times, the Wall Street Journal, the Washington Post, and many other outlets. He is the author of The Myth of the Rational Voter, Why Democracies Choose Bad Policies, and he's coming out with a new book entitled Selfish Reasons to Have More Kids, Why Being a Great Parent is Less Work and More Fun Than You Think, which I, being the father of a new daughter, can't wait for. The title of his speech is Immigration Restrictions, A Solution in Search of a Problem. Please welcome Bryan Caplan.
Thank you very much, Bart. All right, so to begin with my first point, immigration restrictions seem bad on the surface. So let's begin with a thought experiment. Suppose that moved by the plight of Haitians after the earthquake, you decide to take a trip there to help them, you engage in relief work, you give of yourself for 2 weeks, and then you're about to fly home. And when you get home, the person at the airline counter says, sorry, you are not authorized by the US government to return home. And then you say, this must be some mistake. And you go and you talk to the US consulate. They said, there's been no mistake. We just don't want you back. Right? We are denying your reentry. And you say, why? We don't have to give you any reasons why. We're just doing it. Right? Tough. You can't come back. Okay, now I'm going to go out on a limb and say this seems wrong. It seems wrong for the US government to say that you are not allowed to return. Okay, and wrong according to what viewpoint? Well, let's say wrong according to almost any viewpoint I've ever heard of. Right? Wrong according to libertarianism, wrong according to utilitarianism, wrong according to Christianity, wrong according to Buddhism, wrong according to Marxism, wrong according to any doctrine that I've ever heard of about what's right and wrong. Okay, it seems wrong. Right? And simply put, you're not a murderer, are you? Probably not. You're not a murderer, you're not a thief, and life in Haiti is not fun. Life in Haiti has obvious downsides, and these are not minor downsides, poverty. Right? So most of the population lives on $1 a day or less. Maybe with your Western skills, you might be able to earn a bit more stuck in Haiti, but you'd still be in dire poverty. Death, yes, there's a very high death rate in Haiti. Right? People die all the time, right? And 300,000 in that earthquake alone. Right? So horrible, horrible, horrible in terms of your life expectancy. Oppression. Once the Haitian government actually gets its act together again, then the oppression can resume. Right? All right, right now, too much chaos to have much government oppression because they don't know. The government's been destroyed. Now, how do we oppress anybody anymore, right? So, all right. And then a last one, which might not seem as bad as the rest, but it would start to really bear down on you after a while. Isolation. You're in Haiti. What's there to do in Haiti? Like, where is everything? Right? You're in Haiti. Like, there's a few things to do there, and then after you've done those, what else is there? Right? You can't see your friends. You can't go places, right? Other than places in Haiti. Which, again, not to say that there aren't some nice places to go there, but most of the places you would want to go to and most of the people you want to talk to aren't in Haiti. So you're suffering from isolation. Right now, you might go and say, well, the whole problem and why it's so bad to make a person stay in Haiti is that in this thought experiment, your family and friends are not in Haiti with you. So you might say, it's not so bad to be in Haiti as long as you're with all the people that you care about, or most of the people that you care about. All right, so let's change the thought experiment. Suppose that you go and bring your entire family and all of your friends down to Haiti with you. You all volunteer as relief workers. And now when your entire group gets to the airport, you are told you are not allowed to come back to the United States. You are not allowed to return. Why not? I don't have to give you reasons. U.S. government does not give reasons for denying people entry. We're just not doing it. Tough luck. Get out of here. Okay. Now, I would submit that in this case, not only is it not clear that being stuck in Haiti with all your friends and family isn't as bad as just being there alone, but actually in many ways it's worse. Okay? So for example, if I were stuck in Haiti with my family, including my kids, and you said, hey, look, we can get your kids out but not you, I would jump at that chance. Right? I would do whatever it took to get my kids out of Haiti, even if I had to stay behind. Right? Why? Because I don't want them to have to deal with poverty, death, oppression, isolation, and so on. Right? So, infant mortality in Haiti and child mortality in Haiti is terrible. The poverty is terrible. Right? So, not only would it not be a comfort to me to be there with my family, it would make me feel worse, and I would do what I had to do in order to, if there were any option, to get my kids out. Right? So it's not just a matter of it's not bad to be in Haiti if you are there with your friends and family. It's not just a matter of you're the only person that you know that's there. In fact, if you really care about your friends and family, then you wouldn't want them to be there with you for their own sake. Okay, and of course, that picture is from the episode of King of the Hill, where Hank Hill and friends wind up being stuck in Mexico and have to illegally go across the border because they've lost their documents. Okay, so closest thing I could find to this thought experiment occurring. So was it wrong for the U.S. government to deny re-entry to Hank Hill and his friends? Right, and so in the end, they wound up having to sneak in. Okay, so is there an excuse, such as Bart's excuse for lying? At least I only lied because it was the easiest way to get what I wanted. Okay, so yes, one of my favorites. All right, so is there an excuse? All right, now these thought experiments, even I will not say that they prove that immigration restrictions are wrong. They don't prove them. There are many things that seem wrong on the surface that end up being morally justified. For example, if you were to say, is it morally justified to ether a person, knock them out, cut open their body, let blood splurt out, and chop out a body part? Right? You might say, no, that's terrible. Right? What if that body part is diseased and they're going to die unless you take it out? And what if they've consented to being ethered? Or what if they're 3 years old and they can't really give consent? Well, in that case, I guess, All right, then it would be okay to go and ether a person and chop them open and cut out a body part if you had a good reason. Okay, so just because something seems bad on the surface does not prove that it's actually wrong. It could simply be that there's a good excuse, right? There's a good reason. It might seem really bad, but if you really understand the situation, you realize that there is a good reason to do it. Still, here's what I'm going to say. The thought experiments that I just told you about denying an American re-entry to Haiti, or denying an American and his whole family and all his friends re-entry from Haiti, rather, does establish a presumption against immigration restrictions. Right? So presumption is something where if you don't have anything else to say, then it's wrong. Right? So like it is a reason to think that it's wrong, and if someone wants to convince you otherwise, the burden is upon them to come up with some reason why it is not as wrong as it seems. Right? That is the idea of a presumption. Okay. All right. So what I'll say then is that proponents of immigration restrictions have to show. Right? And again, not just have to show because I have some strange view, but according to any moral view that I've ever heard of, proponents have to show that the evils of immigration overcome this presumption against restriction, a presumption that regardless of your starting point, you should share. Right? And on top of this, not only do they need to show that there's some evils of immigration that are strong enough to overcome this presumption, they also need to show something even stronger. They need to show that there's no more humane or cheaper way to handle these problems. So it's not enough to say that immigration causes some problem, it's a bad problem, that's a good enough reason, it overcomes the presumption against telling people they can't come here. They also need to show that there isn't some cheaper and more humane way of taking care of the same problem. Okay, so, and this example here, I would say this is Bart failing to overcome the presumption against lying. Is lying always wrong? No. If there's an axe murderer who comes up to you and says, "Tell me where the children are," I say that it is morally incumbent upon you to lie. Why? Because he's going to kill the children. All right, so that is a great excuse which overthrows the general presumption against lying. However, Bart's story is not a very good example of overcoming the presumption against lying. So like, I'm lying because it's the easiest way to get what I want. Well, who doesn't lie for that reason? Right, so that seems like an example where we laugh because that is not a good enough reason to lie. Okay. So let's consider leading excuses. All right, there's a long list of excuses, and if there are some other ones that I haven't covered, we can come back to those in the Q&A. I'm just going to go over the most popular ones, as well as some niche ones that seem likely to be popular with this current audience. So, leading excuses for immigration restrictions. What are the greater evils that immigration restrictions prevent, which are sufficient to overcome the presumption against saying that someone who's not a murderer or thief can't get on a plane, come here, rent an apartment, and get a job? Okay, so first, protect Americans from poverty caused by low-wage competition. Right, this is probably the most popular one, right? As in the South Park episode where they say they took our jobs, or actually, they cut our wages slightly, right? Or maybe cut our wages a lot. Okay, so the idea is that if you let in a bunch of people from other countries, such as Haiti, the Haitians will be very happy to work for wages that Americans consider quite low. And as a result, this is going to reduce the demand for American labor, and just by usual forces of supply and demand, this will reduce the wages that Americans receive. And that is a bad enough problem to justify saying that immigrants can't come here, or they can only come in very limited quantities with our special permission, which is very hard to get. Okay, so that's leading excuse number one. Another excuse, probably the second most popular one, is immigrants are just coming here to collect welfare and take advantage of the system. Right, so this story here says no. The immigration restrictions, the greater evil of immigration restrictions overcome is that they protect American taxpayers from welfare state exploitation. Okay, so the story is immigrants come here, they will avail themselves of all the free goodies that the welfare state offers, and the reason why it is okay to have immigration restrictions is that it is protecting American taxpayers from this abuse, right? Protecting them from this fiscal abuse. Okay. Another excuse, very popular, to protect American culture, right? So immigrants come over here, they don't speak English, they don't understand our way of life, and they ruin things, all right? They ruin things, right, with whatever it is that they do. Okay, so they come here and they eat their Canadian food, and they watch their Canadian movies, and they don't pronounce the word about properly, and before you know it, they've destroyed everything that is great about our culture. All right, not the standard cultural argument that most people have in mind. Yes, of course, the one that most people have in mind is about Latin American culture ruining our country. So we'll come to that. Okay, and a last leading excuse is to protect American liberty. Right, and this is the one that is probably most popular among libertarians and free market advocates, saying, look, we have this great, wonderfully free country, And immigrants come from countries where people are not so free. And the reason is the people in those countries, unlike us, don't believe in freedom. And if they come here and they vote, they are going to kill the goose that lays the golden eggs. And therefore, it is justified as a matter of self-defense for us to keep them out. Right? So they come here, they are going to take our freedom away from us. And therefore, even though they seem like nice people, even though they've got hard luck stories, we are justified as a matter of self-defense in saying that they are not allowed in. Right? You can't come here because you're going to destroy the freedoms that we enjoy. Okay. All right, so now let's just go over all the main ones. And in the Q&A, we can go over some of the other ones, because there are many others. Okay, so the Protecting Americans from Poverty story. Right? And, by the way, obviously, you could go and do find and replace Americans for Germans or Swedes or whatever other country you might want, or indeed Mexicans. Right? Because, as my dad often angrily tells me, Mexicans keep out immigration from Guatemala. They shoot them. Why don't we learn from them? Right? Maybe we should be shooting Mexicans as the Mexicans shoot the Guatemalans. Okay, so wait a second, I'm confused. Is this an argument about how the Mexicans are even worse than we are, or is it an argument about how we need to be as bad as the Mexicans are? Right? All right, in any case, but just for the sake of convenience, I'll stick to Americans. Protecting Americans from poverty. All right, this is a simple story here, which begins with a hard fact. On Earth, there are 1 billion people who live on $1 a day or less right now. Right now, on this planet, there are 1 billion people who actually manage to survive or eke out an existence on $1 a day and less than income. Do you think some of these people might like to move here if they could? Yeah, probably. Yes. Either you keep earning $1 a day, scrounging garbage from a garbage heap in Manila, or you come to the U.S. and get whatever job you can get here, right? Which would probably be a little bit better, right? You say, I'd be detached from my culture. Is that worth increasing my wage by a factor of 40? Earnings by a factor of 40? Probably, at least in the eyes of many, right? It might not be, all 1 billion might not come at once, but still, even if only 10% of people who are on the edge of starvation were to come over here, that would be a very large number. Okay, so tons of people would love to move here, and if they did, then American wages would plummet. That's the story. Okay, and why would they plummet? Supply and demand. Large increase in the supply of labor. And when there's a large increase in the supply of labor, just like when there's a large increase in the supply of, say, potatoes, the natural result is that the price of the product that is being sold is going to go down by a lot. Okay, so if we were to increase the potato supply by 1 trillion potatoes a year, probably the price of potatoes would go down to like a penny a potato or something like that. And similarly, if we let in 100 million new workers into the United States over a very short time period, the probable result would be that the wages that Americans receive would fall, and not just fall by a little bit, fall by a lot. Okay, so that's the story, and you've probably all heard this many times. And again, this is probably the main reason why most people think we need immigration restrictions. Okay, so the story has many holes. The first one, low-skilled wages are likely to fall, but most Americans are not low-skilled workers. Right, so what is the skill level of the typical person on Earth who earns $1 a day? Let's see. Well, first of all, most of them are not literate. Most of them can't even read or write. Right? Most Americans, on the other hand, can read and write. Is it possible that they would wind up taking different kinds of jobs because they have different skills? Very likely. Right? So not only can they read and write, they have considerably less education. Right? And if you follow my blog, you'll know that I think that education is greatly overvalued, right? And doesn't do nearly as much to train workers as people think. But even I say it does something, right? So the difference in worker productivity between people who have gotten lots of education and people who have gotten little or none is quite large. Right on top of this, of course, when an unskilled immigrant arrives in the United States, they often don't understand anything about modern technological civilization even. Right? So they may never have made a phone call or flipped a light switch. Actually true. Right? Out of these 1 billion people, most have never flipped a light switch in their entire life. Okay, so it is quite likely that when they arrive here, they will not be directly competing with Americans who are much more skilled. Instead, they're going to be doing jobs that we consider very low skilled where you don't need much. Oh, I wish I could be that exciting. One day. Okay, so low skilled wages are very likely to fall, but most Americans are not low skill. In fact, almost no Americans are as low skilled as the typical person who is earning $1 a day. Right now, there are many Americans who are probably as low-skilled as the typical worker coming in from Mexico, right? Because Mexico, by world standards, is actually a wealthy and advanced country. right? Which again, my dad is always baffled when I say this. And he's like, you don't understand. Do you realize how poor they are? Yes, they have a per capita income of about $10,000 per year. By historic standards, that is excellent. And if Mexico, if people in the year 1900 were to look forward and look at Mexico, they would consider it the most amazingly advanced civilization that ever existed in human history, and they would be right. Okay, so Mexico is actually not doing that badly by world standards. So what are the countries that are doing really badly? Haiti, Bangladesh, Pakistan, Congo, right? These are countries where people really do survive on $1 a day. In Mexico, that would be extremely rare. They're doing much better than that. Okay. All right, but anyway, so it means in Mexico, there probably are a lot of workers who have skills that are comparable to those of American high school dropouts anyway. All right. So anyway, first problem is that while low-skilled wages are likely to fall, most Americans are not low-skilled. So they wind up, rather than being competitors with the new workers, they wind up being people who consume the products that the low-skilled workers now provide. Second key point, estimates of this wage effect are small. Right? In the world of academia, the most intellectually respected and academically well-published critic of immigration is George Borjas at Harvard. And if you go to his labor economics textbook and find out what is the harshest critic of immigration in the entire Ivy League, what does he say about the wage effect of low-skilled immigration? Even he claims that all the immigration from recent decades of low-skilled immigrants has reduced the wages of native dropouts. So people born in the United States who dropped out of high school, said decades worth of immigration have reduced their wages in the long run by 4.8%. Not 48%, right? Not 480%, right? 4.8%, and not per year. Total effect of decades, right? And if you don't believe me, just go to his textbook, right? I got his textbook for free, and I said, hey, let's go and see what he says. And wow, right? This is the effect that has led George Borjas to wage a one-man Ivy League crusade against immigration. The horrible effect of decades of millions and millions of people coming here to a vastly better life have reduced the wages of high school dropouts who beat me up and took my lunch money by 4.8%. Doesn't seem that bad, really. All right. So that's his claim. And remember, this is not his claim about the effect on all American wages. This is just the effect on dropouts. His estimate for the long-run effect on other Americans in the middle range of education is actually positive. And then who are the other people who lose from immigration, according to Borjas? People with graduate degrees. How can that be? Well, let's see. Remember, take a look at your professors. How many of your professors are foreign-born? People like Alex Tabarrok, the Canadian, comes here taking the jobs from decent American PhDs. Okay, yes. So, what's going on? Well, there's a reason for this, which is there's a gigantic loophole in U.S. immigration law, which makes it easy for a PhD to come to an American university, even if he's born any country on earth. Right? What is the loophole? The basic loophole is we just have to say there isn't any American who has applied for the job who's qualified to do it. You may say, is that really true? There isn't anyone who could do what Alex does? Well, the trick is that when you hire a foreign professor, you just define the job so narrowly that only that professor can do it, right? So you say, look, we need someone who specializes in empirical public choice, who has a German language specialization, who has done research in campaign finance, who has also done research and you just add on a few more requirements, and pretty soon you have described only one human being on earth, which is the candidate they wish to hire. If you wanted to try to use this loophole to hire a ditch digger, you would not get anywhere. They said, look, we need a ditch digger with foreign language, who speaks the Quechua dialect. Right? Go on, yes. The immigration officials in the United States would not let you get away with that, but they will let you get away with it for hiring a professor. And so that is why people like me have suffered from the enormous burden of this massive oversupply of cut-rate PhDs who take our jobs, drive our wages down, then corrupt our students' minds. But does anyone care about my suffering? Yeah. So every now and then I've seen people saying, look, the defenders of immigration are just a bunch of PhDs who are not affected by immigration. I say, you don't know what you're talking about. I'm more affected by immigration than anyone. They've destroyed my chance to be at Harvard. If only we could kick out every foreign-born professor in the Ivy League, I could be there. Right. So they have done terrible things to me, these immigrants, and yet, I will say, of course, there's also many of them, these immigrants are my friends, and I would rather earn the lower wages and have the worst prospects than see them thrown out. Right? But it's in terms of my personal financial and career situation, these immigrants really have done damage to me because they have skills that are very similar to mine. Okay, so estimates of the wage effect are small, even for these low-skilled workers. And this is not this is not just a libertarian or pro-immigration person. George Borjas himself will agree with this. He'll still be extremely upset and say that 4.8% is something to get very upset about. But in terms of the number, that is his number. Right? Furthermore, there are offsetting benefits for American employers, investors, consumers, and landowners. All right, so consider this. What would happen to the real estate prices in Los Angeles if every Mexican immigrant went home? All right, so if you were to purge every single Mexican immigrant, track every single one down, send every single one home, imagine what the effect would be on Los Angeles real estate. And who owns almost all that real estate? What is their nationality? Americans, yes, because in general, illegals do not purchase real estate for obvious reasons. Let's see, what happens if I get kicked out of the country, first of all, and also my income is low? Right? So you put those two things together, they don't own very much real estate, instead they rent from Americans, and as a result, this would lead to declining property values. Okay, so, and again, for a place like I said, Los Angeles, where people complain about immigration the most, people who own real estate there are also getting the largest benefit from immigrants. Okay, so also benefits for American employers, right? So when wages do fall, this makes life easier for American employers. Investors, right? So when investors are hiring, investors ultimately are people hiring workers, so they're better off. Consumers, so think about the well-being of American senior citizens if they could hire immigrants, low-skilled immigrants, to do all kinds of low-skilled jobs for them at a much lower wage than they currently pay an American worker to do so. So if you let in a bunch of immigrants, you're 80, it might be possible for you to continue to live at home rather than having to move into a nursing home because you could go and hire 1 or 2 or 3 immigrants to be at your beck and call. Right now it's too expensive to go and hire someone to do it. But again, the kinds of jobs that senior citizens need someone to do for them are not highly skilled jobs. It's just that they have trouble doing them themselves. Right? So if you were a senior citizen, if there were more low-wage immigrants around, more low-skilled immigrants around, it would be more affordable for you to go and hire people to be your personal servants. Like here's one that might make a big difference in the lives of many senior citizens, as well as the people that they drive around. If there were more immigrants here and more low-skilled immigrants, then it would be a lot easier for people to hire a personal driver. Right? So you wouldn't have to give up your driver's license, and you would not have to endanger all of your neighbors as you drive around the streets when you're 80 years old. Okay. All right. So, right, consumers and of course landowners as well. Okay. Now another problem with the immigration restrictions to protect Americans from poverty, which is that Borjas' estimates assume that native and immigrant labor are identical, right, within an education class, but they're not. Even when you compare immigrants and natives who have identical levels of education, there are big differences in the kinds of skills that they have and in the kinds of jobs they take. So there's 2 other economists who specialize in immigration, Perry and Ottavanio, and what they do is they say, hey, let's suppose that there's 2 kinds of skills. There are language-based job skills and there are non-language-based job skills. So for example, if driving a taxi is basically a non-language skill, right? Once you understand what the name of the street that someone wants to go to, you know their address, you can drive a taxi cab even though you don't speak their language. On the other hand, say being a server in a restaurant is a language-based skill. Even when it's a low-skilled job, if you don't speak English, it is very hard for you to take orders from English-speaking clients. Okay? And if you just go down the list of different jobs, you'll be able to notice that jobs are generally a mix of these 2 kinds of skills, and the mix varies a lot. Like a machinist, this is almost entirely a job that is not language-based. Or we go and look at a restaurant, you'll often see that the immigrants who've been around for a while are the ones who are serving, and someone who was fresh off the boat, where do they work in a restaurant? Yeah, they work in the back. They're a cook, right? So they go and talk with other people who don't speak English, and they do a job where you don't really need to have a language skill in order to do it. Okay, so Perry and Ottavanio go and redo Borjas' basic approach, and when they adjust for this, they find that between 1990 and 2004, immigration actually raised wages. Immigration actually raised wages on average. The only people who lost were dropouts. And they lost by less than what Borjas said. Right? And again, the idea is that when more immigrants come in, there's a large increase in the supply of non-language skills, a smaller increase in the supply of language skills. Same time, there is only a moderate increase in demand for the non-language skills and a larger increase in the demand for the language skills because the immigrants need stuff. And when you put this all together, the result is that on net, the typical American actually earns more money now because immigrants came in and increased the supply of stuff that Americans buy. Right now, so when you're wondering, well, let's see, why is this effect so clear? The effect is clearest because when more immigrants come in, Americans change the kinds of jobs that they have. natives switch over from jobs that are more based in non-language skills into more language-based skills. So one of the really neat things that Perry and Ivanio show is that if you take a look at different cities with different fractions of foreign-born citizens, the higher the fraction of foreign-born citizens, the more likely low-skilled Americans are to be in language-based skills. So in jobs where, in cities where there are very few immigrants, then Americans drive the cabs too. Americans work as maids in cities where there's very few immigrants. On the other hand, in cities with very large number of immigrants, native-born Americans who have good language skills don't do those jobs, they do other skills. And so basically what happens is that people specialize in skills that are more heavily rewarded, and the net effect for most workers, other than dropouts, is to raise their wages, and even dropouts don't lose nearly as much as Borjas's already small estimate indicates. Okay. Now, a final point to realize is that if there were a very large number of immigrants, there are a lot of things that would change. Right? So under open borders, low-skilled wages would fall, and rents would rise, and as a result, a billion people who want to move here right now would no longer want to move here. Right? There'd be a large increase in rents, a large decline in wages for very low-skilled workers, and as a result, this would be a natural limitation upon the number of people who want to come here. So like right now, it is perfectly legal for everyone in this room to move to Manhattan. So, and there's probably a lot of people in this room who think Manhattan is cool, and yet you aren't living there. Right? Why aren't you living there? Right? Because it's expensive. Right, because it's expensive, because a lot of people agree that Manhattan is cool. This has driven up rents tremendously. Of course, there's other reasons like zoning restrictions and building code restrictions, but part of the reason is just that it's a cool place to live, and this drives up the price of living in Manhattan. At the same time, if you take a look, if you compare the wages relative to the cost of living in Manhattan, wages in Manhattan are actually lower. Right? So you say, how can that be true? Aren't wages in Manhattan higher than the rest of the country? They are higher, but the cost of living is even higher than the increase in wages. So in fact, when you live in Manhattan, you are actually working for lower wages than you would in the rest of the country. Okay, so roughly speaking, I think that wages in Manhattan are something like 15% higher for comparable workers, and yet the cost of living might be 20 or 25% higher. Okay, so that is another reason why people who think Manhattan is cool don't move there. Right? And the same market forces would also persuade a lot of people who think they want to move here not to move here, because there would be a change in wages and a change in rents. So when you imagine the chaos, don't really think that a billion people would come here. Although, of course, in the long run, there would be an enormous amount of mobility, because in the long run, we could build a ton of extra housing. In fact, we could, first of all, fill up all the vacant housing that we have right now, like tomorrow, right, with all the people who would like to be here. And then the construction industry would see a boom, the likes of which the world has never seen, right? Because there'd be so many people who'd love to come here, and at first they'd be saying, wow, like it's so hard to afford these American rents, but over time the American rents would come down as builders in all the parts of the country where you can still easily build and get permission would start building to house the new immigrants. But anyway, the imagined chaos that people foresee from letting in a ton of immigrants overnight would not materialize, because market forces, wages, and rents provide a natural check. Okay, now, so overall then, I'm questioning that immigration restrictions actually do protect Americans from poverty, and most they protect a very small minority of Americans from poverty. Right? And you may say, what's so important about them compared to all these other Americans, or compared to the immigrants themselves? But anyway, let's just suppose for the sake of argument that that immigration restrictions really did protect Americans from poverty. So let's buy the argument that immigration restrictions protect us from poverty, hook, line, and sinker, and then say this. Look, even if the complaint is true, is there any cheaper and more humane alternative? And here I will say, not only is there, but there is clearly a much cheaper and more humane alternative. And that alternative is to freely admit immigrants, but charge them an admission fee or a surtax. So the admission fee would be to say, you can come here, but you have to pay us $10,000 to come in to get your green card. Or the surtax would be, you're welcome to come in, but you have to pay 10 percentage points higher taxes than Americans do. Okay, and then we take this money and we use it to compensate the native workers. Take the money and we set up the American-born high school dropouts relief fund. Right, and if you're in that group, you get a check. Right, anyone that we think is losing gets some money from this. Right, and this is clearly better than what's going on right now. It would serve the same function. It would still deter immigrants from coming and putting pressure on American workers. And we would take that money and we would compensate them for whatever pressure did occur. But at the same time, it would still be much easier for immigrants to come in. We could let a lot more, because we're taking money that right now goes into hiring coyotes to smuggle them in, and we instead putting it straight into the pockets of the American high school dropouts who are suffering. Okay, so even if you buy the argument in its strongest form, it is not a good argument for immigration restrictions. It is not a good argument for what we have. What we have is much more expensive and needlessly cruel. right? And instead of doing this, we could go and say you need $10,000 to come here, and yes. Are there a lot of people in Mexico who would scrounge together $10,000 in order for the admission fee? Yeah, definitely. And so, or if we did the surtax, are there a lot of Mexicans who would say, who we said, look, you can come here, but you have to pay not only income tax, but you have to pay 10 extra percentage points to be here? Are a lot of Mexicans who would say, no, that's terrible. There's no way I'll pay those extra taxes to support those lazy high school dropouts. Probably be some, but there's probably a lot more who would say, that's it? And now I can come and get a job? Awesome. Okay, so now how about protecting taxpayers? All right, so here's the simple story is that, and I'm using up my time quickly. All right, simple story, American welfare state pays more for idleness than many countries pay for work. That is true. Okay, so immigrants therefore come to abuse the system. And even Milton Friedman said, you cannot simultaneously have free immigration and a welfare state, a quote that has been repeated ever since. If we read the whole interview, Friedman said something else that was actually clearly not very smart. So if you go and Google my blog and this quote, you'll see what he said that was clearly not smart. Okay, so was he right? Well, here's a key fact about the American welfare state, the dirty secret of how it really works. Most money in the United States budget that we give, that the welfare state provides, goes to the old and not to the poor. Right? The American welfare state is primarily about helping the old, not the poor. Social Security, Medicare, add that up, that is far larger than everything else that we give to the poor. And even if you take a look at Medicaid, most of that is actually not for people who have been poor in the normal sense. Rather, most of the money in Medicaid is for people who are middle class, elderly, and have burned through all of their assets or had the foresight to give all their assets away to their kids, and now they need to go to a nursing home, and they're out of money. Okay, so most money in the United States welfare state goes to the old, not to the poor, and new immigrants tend to be young. Okay, so you put this all together and say, well, in that case, it's not nearly as clear as most people might think that immigrants are going to be taking advantage of us, because on the one, first of all, they're not old, so it takes them a long time to collect, and secondly, they're going to be paying taxes to all these old people, paying taxes to support the old people. Okay, so Julian Simon, who admittedly is an economist who's very sympathetic to immigration, but a number of others, calculate that the average immigrant actually is a net taxpayer. The average immigrant right now is a net taxpayer, right? Which makes most people like totally absurd. Okay, a number of things to remember. First of all, much government spending is non-rival. Immigrants help spread the cost of national defense and debt service. Right? We could let in 10 million extra people from Mexico, and we would not need any more nuclear weapons to protect them. Okay, if we do need nuclear weapons to protect them. Okay, we would not need to go and invade any more countries if we let in more Mexicans. Okay, we would not require more troops in order to occupy Iraq if we let in more Mexicans. So when you let in more immigrants, this actually spreads the cost of defense, which is another big part of the budget. It spreads the cost of debt service. So anytime that you've seen now the typical American owes, say, $50,000 worth, the average American share of the national debt is $50,000. If you were to have a large increase in population, that would just by matter of arithmetic reduce the amount that every person in the country owes. And this is true for many other things, such as, say, fireworks shows. Now, a further result, lots of people can watch the fireworks show. Further result, actually, illegal immigrants are a fantastic deal for taxpayers, right? Because what happens when you pay taxes on a fake Social Security number? You pay taxes, yes. When you pay taxes on a Social Security number, the money still comes out of your paycheck. However, you do not actually get to go and collect that money when you're old because it's a fake number. Okay, so people like this are pure profit for the Treasury. Contrary to all the people complaining about illegal specifically, they're the best deal of all. Okay. All right, now I will say there are other economists who are not as optimistic as Simon. Right? But almost no serious researcher finds a big negative fiscal effect of immigration. There are some who claim a small negative fiscal effect of immigration, but no serious researcher will say that immigrants are on net a large drain on Americans. Okay. So again, are there people who say this? Yes, they're just not serious researchers. Okay, but let us just go and suppose the worst is true and that immigrants really are coming here in order to abuse American taxpayers and are already doing so to a shameless degree. So even if the complaint were true, once again, there is clearly a much cheaper and more humane alternative, which is to freely admit immigrants but make them ineligible for benefits. You can come here, you can work, but you can't collect benefits. That's the story, right? You are being issued a guest worker card. If you find that too harsh, fine. You can say after 5 years you may start collecting benefits. Or you can say once you have paid a total of $100,000 in taxes, then you may start collecting benefits, right? These are all things that are both cheaper, right, and more humane. Right? Because you think how many immigrants do you think there are who you can go to Mexico and say, hey, here's the deal. You can come here, you can get a job, but you can't collect any benefits. You don't want to do that, do you? Yeah, a lot of Mexicans would love that deal and would consider it actually absolutely fantastic and far preferable to paying someone $3,000 to smuggle them through the desert without water. right, or without much water. Okay, how about protecting American culture? Right, another complaint. Immigrants are destroying American culture. Right, so they won't learn English, they won't fit in, they name their kids funny names, right, and so on. Okay, so this has some obvious problems. So even Huntington, who is probably the most eminent defender of the Hispanic immigrants are destroying our culture complaint. So he fears these cultural effects very greatly. Even he admits that over 90% of second-generation Mexicans speak fluent English. Right, so what's left to the complaint? 90% of people in their second generation speak fluent English. What more you don't want? Like, stop celebrating Cinco de Mayo. Right, celebrate the right holidays. Cheer for the American team at the Olympics. All right. So the complaints start to seem fairly petty. All right. Now a deeper problem here. Take a look at America's cultural centers. Right, and I will say, let's see, the cultural centers of the United States, by almost all accounts, are California, which gives us movies, and New York, which gives us television and plays and so on, if you like those. Okay. As Homer says, I have seen plays less boring than this. But anyway. So American cultural centers, California and New York, have very high immigration. And on the other hand, take a look at the states that almost everyone would consider a cultural wasteland. No offense to anyone who's from these states, but perhaps you are here because you agree with me. All right. Cultural wastelands such as North Dakota. I've never heard of anyone talk about the great culture of North Dakota, South Dakota, Arkansas, Alabama, Montana, West Virginia. All right. All of these places have extremely low immigration. Right? And no one wants to consume their cultural output, or almost no one. Right? What culture do they actually produce? Not much. Okay, now, of course, if you are social scientists, you'll say, well, is this causal? Well, it seems partly causal. Like, part of what goes on with Hollywood is that we get the talent from all over the world. We get foreign actors, foreign directors, foreign writers. But anyway, let's talk about the kind of culture that most people actually care about the most. Because most people care about isn't foreign films. What people care about is food. Right? And for food, it is absolutely clear that where the causation runs. Places with lots of immigrants have great food because immigrants are the ones who provide the great food. And places without immigrants have terrible food because American food by itself is barely worth eating. All right, and if this were Britain, the story would be even clearer. I don't think everybody says, British food is so good anymore because it's not British anymore. Okay, all right, so. But in any case, even if this complaint about immigrants destroying American culture were true, once again, there are much cheaper and more humane alternatives. How about we admit anyone who passes an English fluency exam? We give a test, say in order to come here, you must pass an English fluency exam. Of course, to be fair, you don't want to make it so hard that most Americans couldn't pass it, most native-born Americans. But let's see, do you think that if all you needed to do in order to gain admission to the United States was to pass an English fluency exam, how many people on earth do you think would immediately be going to their language school and acquiring fluency in a very short time period? I think very quickly you would see massive numbers. And of course, in fact, there's plenty of people around the world who already speak fluent English, who learned in school and and could speak it just fine here, and would in no way destroy our culture with their failure to speak English. Right? So admit anyone who passes an English fluency exam. There could be a cultural literacy test. Of course, when you say that, to think of like how little most Americans know about culture, it's almost funny to think, like, who wrote La Traviata? We're going to, like, if you don't know that, you don't belong in this country. I guess it could be like how many points is a field goal or something like that. That's our American culture. All right, last one, and this is the one that most libertarians are most worried about. Certainly the most popular excuse for restricting immigration among libertarians. Look, immigrants come from statist countries, and they will eagerly vote to ruin our country too. Okay, so at minimum, this problem is greatly overstated. First of all, non-natives have low turnout, even controlling for other factors, which incidentally is the kind of thing that leads the people who complain about culture to attack immigrants. Right, so you have the people who worry about immigrants destroying culture saying not only this, but then they don't vote. Right? We want these people who we hate in every other way to vote and affect our politics. All right? All right, so yes, if you've ever heard the expression, damned if you do and damned if you don't, yes, it applies here. Right, so non-natives have low turnout. Right? And this is true even controlling for other factors. It's not just that they have low turnout because they're poor, they have low education. Just being non-native makes you less likely to participate in politics, probably because you're like, I don't know what's going on, who cares, whatever. Finally I can go and make 40 times what I was earning in Haiti. I don't really care who wins the election very much. Okay, so another key point. Liberty benefits from status quo bias and from natives' political slack. So psychologists often talk about something called status quo bias, where to a large extent, the fact that something exists is a reason in most people's minds to keep it that way. All right, so someone comes to a new country, they see that the status quo in that new country is that they have more liberty than they had at home. There is a natural tendency for people who, when they arrive, to say, oh, this is how it's done here. Okay, I guess that's fine. Again, that's not true in every case, but there is a tendency for people to look at a status quo and say, if it exists, it's fine by me. Right? If you think that existing policies in the United States are more libertarian than those of the people in the country in the countries of origin, this is something else that tends to lead to protect our institutions and our policies from whatever dangerous effects immigrants might have. Furthermore, natives also have a much stronger share of political slack. Right? Why is this? Well, even though it is a democracy, it does seem like politicians have a bit of wiggle room in order to do what they want. And right now, almost all politicians are native-born Americans. Okay? And they tend to want to keep things the way that they were when they grew up, or to keep them the way they're used to, or the way that they like. So again, this tends to push things in a more pro-liberty direction. Now, more importantly than these effects, something that is barely considered but is very well documented, is that immigrants tend to reduce native support for the welfare state because people don't like helping out groups. Okay, so the net effect is probably to shrink the welfare state. Here's the point. Where in the world do we see the largest welfare states? We see the largest welfare states in ethnically homogeneous countries. Right, so places like Denmark, right, where at least until recently almost everyone is a Dane. And what is the deal with the big welfare state in Denmark? In Denmark, until recently at least, when someone got money from the welfare state, no one could point to them and saying, this person is collecting money, sucking money from we Danes, because the person sucking the money was himself a Dane. All right? And as a result, if you can't make this argument, support for the welfare state tends to be high because people feel good about supporting people, about taking care of people like themselves, and they also tend to think that people like themselves don't take advantage of other people. On the other hand, ethnically heterogeneous states where there are many ethnicities together, where there isn't a common identity, tend to have small welfare states and smaller government spending in general. Why? Because when government politicians comes along and says we need to spend money to go and help people, there's a lot of people who either openly say or think to themselves, which people? Not people like me, we're the ones who pay for all this stuff. It's other people who are the ones who get all the stuff. We're people, my kind, the one who get stuck dry by all these people. Okay. All right. Yes, and interestingly enough, there's actually a very plausible case that one of the main reasons why America has a relatively small welfare state is that 13% of Americans are black, and white Americans don't totally consider blacks to be full Americans on some gut level. Well, they're Americans, but they're not like Americans like us. Okay, and as a result, they are more reluctant to support the welfare state. And again, there's good data here where a lot of resistance to the welfare state is, it turns out to be disguised resistance to wanting to pay for programs that benefit blacks. Okay, so on one hand, you could say, what an awful reason to oppose the welfare state. On the other hand, it is a reason to oppose the welfare state that actually does change people's minds. Okay, so when you let immigrants in, even if they are in fact more status, the effect on natives is to make them less supportive of the welfare state. And the net effect is actually probably to shrink the welfare state, which is what we see in general in the data, where you're more ethnically homogeneous countries where people all share one ethnicity have the big welfare states, and ones that are more mixed have smaller welfare states. Okay, but again, even if this complaint were true, once again, there is a much cheaper and more humane alternative, which is to freely admit immigrants to work and live, but not to vote. So if we wanted to label it in a way that was offensive, we could call them second-class citizens. Or we could just say they're guest workers, right? They're guest workers, you don't get to vote, right? And you could even say that guest workers, part of what happens when you become a guest worker here is that you waive birthright citizenship, so your kids will never be more than guest workers either, and their kids will never be more than guest workers either, so on, unless, of course, they go through and learn all about our great way of life. Okay. All right, now, at this point, the last argument that comes up here is a variant on protecting American liberty. What about terrorism? Well, so what about the terrorists who really hate American liberty? Right? Because they do hate us for our liberty, as we all know. Okay. All right, so what about terrorism? Well, here's the thing. Right now in Mexico, there's an entire occupation of people who are known colloquially as coyotes. Their job is to smuggle people into the United States for a few $1,000s, and they already exist. Right? And how likely is it that you think that a coyote would see that someone wasn't even Mexican and was from some country they weren't even sure, they didn't even speak Spanish, but they're willing to pay $3,000 to get smuggled across the border? How many coyotes are going to say, no. How do I know you're not a security risk to the United States? All right, maybe they would, and maybe they're worried about backlash, but it seems implausible that if you were someone who was a Middle Eastern terrorist trying to come into the United States, and you first sneak into Mexico, and then find a coyote that you couldn't find a Mexican coyote who would be happy to smuggle you in for the usual fee. Or at most, he'd say, all right, no, that's a security risk. That'll be $6,000. Okay. All right, so since you can already get into the United States for a few $1,000s, this means that any serious terrorist, anyone who actually is committed and has any realistic prospect of doing anything, is already here. Right? So any serious terrorist who actually wants to do it and is willing to make some moderate sacrifices and scrape together some money to go and carry out his nefarious deeds has already arrived. Right? Fortunately, that number has been roughly 0 for 9 years straight. So far so good. Yes, again, my dad was telling me, and you know that like 10% of the people crossing the Mexican border aren't even Mexican. Yes, they're Guatemalans, they're Salvadorans, they're people who first illegally go into Mexico and then illegally go into the United States. Like, no. Yeah, that's what they are. All right. Either that or they're extremely incompetent or impoverished terrorists. Right? All right, so the verdict. Yes, so in fairness to Nelson, as far as I know, he didn't actually say this, but he should have. It is the classic bully's line. You're breathing my air. That's why I'm punching you. You brought this on yourself. Right, yes, which probably is the ultimate argument for immigration restrictions. Okay, so standard arguments fail to overcome the presumption against immigration restrictions. Okay, so how so? First of all, the problems that restrictions purport to solve are at best grossly exaggerated. Right, all those problems that, as we saw, are grossly exaggerated by people who are rather hyper, let's say, right? People who see the slightest evidence that there's a problem and first of all lead to the conclusion the problem is large. Secondly, here's the thing, even if you thought the problems were serious and substantial, so even if you disagree with everything that I said until basically the last line of each slide, there are certainly cheaper and more humane alternatives, right? So everything else I said about the social science, merely probable, could be wrong. But to say that there are cheaper and more humane alternatives, I don't think that you can with a straight face deny that these alternatives are possible and would work at least as well as what we currently do. Okay, so what are these cheaper and more humane alternatives? Entry fees. You want to come here, you have to pay some lump sum fee in order to get in. And we take that money and we use it to compensate whoever is harmed by immigration. All right? Surtaxes. If you want to come in, you have to pay a higher income tax rate. Okay? Both much better than telling someone you are not allowed in at all. Welfare eligibility requirements. So if you think the problem is they're coming here to take advantage of the welfare state, you can simply say you are not eligible to collect welfare. You are here legally, you can work, right, but you cannot collect any benefits. If you want to send your kids to school, you have to pay the tuition. Right, and again, if you think that's too harsh, fine, then we can split the difference. Right, again, so yes, I think all of these are too harsh, but if it were a matter of either doing this or immigration restrictions, then I would say do these in a heartbeat. These are all policies that a sensible, humane person might favor, unlike immigration restrictions, which, once you know the facts, a sensible, humane person could not favor. Yes, that is my position. Yes, once you know that there are alternatives. Again, you may have never considered the alternatives. You may have been brainwashed by your parents, say. Okay. All right, welfare eligibility requirements. Fluency test. If you're worried about the cultural damage, a fluency test, again, is a much more humane and cheaper way of handling the problem than saying you can't come here because who knows whether you speak English. How about you just try speaking English to them and see if they speak English? All right. It seems like it's a more humane and cheaper approach. Because, there are people outside of the United States who do speak English. Let's see, cultural literacy tests. If you really want to go and push this cultural argument, which when you actually start to write down a test of what every American should and plausibly does know about culture, right? Either the test has to be ridiculously short because Americans are so culturally illiterate, or you wind up having to put things like on how many points is a field goal and things that you really have to laugh when you call it culture, but whatever. Right? It's either like learn the important facts about American culture, such as the number of points at a field goal, or you can't come here. So you know what? Let's give them the field goal test. Let's make them learn about football. That's way better than saying they can't come here at all. It seems dumb, but if this is what it takes to humor the American public and letting them in, great, fine. All right, voting restrictions, saying that you can come here but you can't vote, even saying that your kids can never vote. Your grandkids can never vote. In perpetuity, you cannot vote until you do something or other, or you can even say, look, you can never vote no matter what you do. Way better than saying you can't come here at all. All right, so this brings us to the only halfway decent case against immediate open borders, which environmentalists will call the precautionary principle. Okay, and it's something like this. So far, so good. Immigrants haven't ruined the country yet. In fact, immigrants are ultimately the reason why almost all of us are here. right? Because almost everyone in the United States is either an immigrant, or a child of immigrant, or a grandchild of immigrant, or a great-grandchild of immigrant, right? The people who are actually descended only from the people who came over on the Mayflower are very few. Okay, so the reason we're here is that we did not have this precautionary principle. We didn't say, who knows what will happen if that guy comes here? Sure, everything's fine so far, but that guy comes? I don't know. That could be the card on that could be the one additional card on the house of cards that brings the entire tower tumbling down. Okay, so far so good. So far so good. But who knows what will happen if immigration drastically increases? Okay, so does anyone know with certainty what would happen if we let in 100 million extra immigrants? No, I don't know with certainty. I'll say I don't know with certainty what will happen if we let in one more. Maybe that one more will be the terrorist who will go and bring in the nuclear weapon, and then all go from there. It'll be a terrible episode of 24. Except Jack Bauer will not save us. Right? It's possible. Right? It can be imagined. Okay. So and again, like you say, this doesn't sound like something environmentalists would say. Well, it's something they say about, say, polluting something or building a new factory. Right? So probably not something to say about immigration, except of course for your truly anti-human environmentalists who also say we should just keep people in the third world where they're poor and don't hurt the planet. Right, yes, and there are a number who say such, yes, including Paul Ehrlich. Okay, so continuing with the verdict. All right, so the precautionary principle might actually sound good if you're safe in the first world. If you're here, you might say, look, my life is fine. Why do we need anything to change? Look, I know I'm okay right now. I like my life. If there were any drastic change of any kind, my life might cease to be as great as it is. Let's just change things right now. Stop things from changing right now. Keep everything the way that they are forever. That's what I want. Okay, so we say, look, I'm fine. Why take any chances at all with anything? Okay, so again, if you are totally selfish and you're very cautious, I'll say, look, I don't have that much better for you. I don't have any really great argument to convince you at this point, other than to say, yeah, it's true that you are protecting yourself here, but your attitude does show callous indifference for the rights of everyone who is not as lucky as you, which is billions of people, right? And not billions of people who already have the comforts that you enjoy, but billions of people whose children die because their water is not pure, billions of people who live on wages that you can't even imagine how they can manage to stay alive on the incomes that they have. Right? It does show callous indifference to their rights. And when you really step back and think about it, all the other excuses for immigration restrictions that we already considered are subject to the same complaint. Right? So the greatest philosopher on earth, Michael Huemer, right, who's also a good friend of mine, but he's a good friend of mine because he's such a great philosopher. Right? So he has a fantastic essay, which everyone on earth should read, called Is There a Right to Immigrate? And points out that the kinds of arguments that people use for immigration restrictions are ones that almost no one would consider even to pass the laugh test if it were a reason to condemn a fellow American to Haiti. Right? So imagine going back to the thought experiment in the beginning, you are the immigration agent of the United States explaining why the American who went to Haiti to help out is not allowed to come home. And you say, look, you can't come home because you depress our wages a little bit. Sorry. It's like, how much? It's really slight, but we just don't want him to go down at all. So you can't come back. Sorry. Too bad. You like due to now, are you planning on getting a job? Right? And this is one where you're in a catch-22. If you say yes, then you are hurting wages. And if you say no, then you're going to be burdened on the welfare state. All right? Yes. Okay. So, or again, just for the precautionary principle, imagine telling the American you can't come back because who knows what diseases you picked up here in Haiti? How do we know that while you were in Haiti you didn't pick up an infectious disease which will kill millions when you come back to the United States? Can you prove with certainty that you didn't pick up any rare tropical disease? No? Sorry, you can't come back. Because everyone at home is right now very happy without a tropical disease, and you can't prove with absolute certainty that you won't infect them. And until that day, which will never come, because you can't prove such things with certainty, you can't come home. Make the best of your new life here in Haiti. I wish you well. All right, yes. Or imagine telling the American who is trying to come home from Haiti, you can't come home because you might collect welfare. Say, are you collecting welfare? Are you collecting welfare now? No. Have you ever collected it? No. Can you prove for sure that you'll never collect any welfare? No. Oh, well then. Well, in that case, we're going to keep you here because we're just a little bit nervous about how you might be a burden on the welfare state, right? Or start getting to the arguments that the immigration officer might give that would get him strangled by the irate American, if the other ones didn't already. You can't come home because you sully our culture. Right? You go there and try to come home, and they say, look, can you name 4 of the operas of Wagner? No? We don't need your kind in America. America is trying to preserve a certain level of European culture, and people like you are dragging us down. You can't come home. Like, what if I go and learn about some operas of Wagner? Come back and then we'll talk. Of course, by then there'll probably be some other cultural requirements which we'll have imposed. And every time you come back, there'll be some new ones because culture just expands constantly. Right? So there's, but you're welcome to try to become cultured. And, who knows? Maybe. One day there might be a cultured foreigner somewhere. All right. Or finally, you can't come home because you vote the wrong way. All right. So you're about to come home, and the immigration official says, "May I ask how you plan to vote upon your return?" And you say, and you really try to get some idea, and you're like, "Democrat?" "Sorry, wrong answer. We don't let Democrats into the United States anymore because they vote the wrong way. Sorry." Or you go Republican. "Sorry, another wrong answer." What is the right answer? I'm not telling. Right? But whatever the idea that Americans could be refused entry because they had the wrong answer to that question would strike almost everyone, and I think including most libertarians, as absurd and outrageous. Okay. All right, now the last I'll say is libertarians' favorite excuse, or probably least unfavorite. All right, so here I'll give you another hypothetical. Right now, there is good public opinion data showing that young Americans under the age of 30, are much more status on average than immigrants. Right, so young Americans under the age of 30 are now extremely statist. Right, so obviously we professors, libertarian professors, did a very poor job of things, and now there is a new generation of extremely statist young people, right, who are probably going to be voting statist for their entire lives. Right, it's maybe too late for them. Maybe not, but there is a tendency for people who vote a certain way when they're young to vote that way for the rest of their lives. Okay, so would this be a sound libertarian argument for just deporting everyone under the age of 30? Yeah, well, let's see. Of course, a lot of you would get deported too. And if you were to say, but I'm not like them, well, that's what they all say. Sorry. You can't make an omelet without breaking a few eggs. I'm so sorry to be deporting young libertarians along with all the other young people under 30, but it's the only way to protect liberty for everyone who's over 30. Sorry. It's unfortunate and sad that you have to suffer along with the people who voted for who need to be exiled for the crime of voting for Obama. Which again, you might say, well, that is a little bit of a crime. Is it a crime so awful to merit exile from the country? Right? Again, you might bite the bullet and say, yes, it is. All right? In fact, everyone who didn't vote for Ron Paul should be exiled from the country. You could say that. Right? And if you did, I'd say, all right, well, I guess you're consistent. Right? But do you really think about all the people that you know and care about who did not vote for Ron Paul? Do you really want to see them exiled from the United States because of their political views? And does that seem like a reasoned or measured response to their views, rather than trying to persuade them and otherwise saying, man, I'm stuck with these people? Okay, so this brings us to the last bottom line. So even in the worst case scenario, let's assume that every single complaint about immigrants is true to the full extent that their harshest critics say. Right? Even in this case, immigrants are still far more sinned against than sinning. What are their terrible offenses supposed to be? They moderately reduce wages. They moderately abuse the welfare state. They moderately hurt our culture. And they vote moderately the wrong way. And as a result, they must be exiled in poverty to live on $1 a day for the rest of their lives. A fitting punishment for the horrors they inflict upon us. Right? So, what is the worst that they do to us? Well, we go through that list. That's the worst. How bad is that? Not very bad compared to exiling someone to Haiti. Not even very bad compared to exiling someone to Mexico, which again by world standards is fine, but compared to American standards, Mexico is quite awful still in many ways. All right, so what is the worst that they hypothetically might do to us, and look at what we already do to them. Right? One case, it is a purely hypothetical harm, which even if the worst were true, would be quite mild. On the other hand, there is a very clear and certain harm that Americans already inflict on immigrants when they support the immigration restrictions that we have. So I will leave it there. Thank you. So we've got about 10, 15 minutes for questions, so happy to take any and all questions, however hostile.
All right, if you'd like to ask a question, please raise your hand, and Catherine will bring the microphone toward you, and please speak loudly because the microphone is only for the camera, so please raise your hand.
Yes.
Raise your hand.
Let's see. Is the microphone going to anyone? Or have yes. Hi.
I was wondering what you think about the proposition that crime is a problem among immigrants. And
All
whether you
right.
think that's
So
actually a
so there's
problem.
very good data here, and the punchline is that immigrants actually commit crime at a lower rate than natives. Right? Immigrants commit crime at a lower rate than natives. So again, this is more of a case where people take a look at and any immigrant commits a crime, and this becomes some horrible feature of immigrants in general, rather than just something that a small fraction of humans do. Okay, so and again, can that be right? Again, the most careful research by people who have no axe to grind does indeed find that the crime rate for immigrants is actually lower than that of natives. So and again with terrorism. Let's see, if we were to go and add in like all terrorist deaths and murders, so that's still only 3,000, which compared to the total number of murders in the last 10 years, which would be more like 300,000. Right, so again, probably not enough to tip the scales. Yes.
You say there's 1 billion people in the world living on $1 a day.
Or
but
less, yes.
Right. Wouldn't the main immigrants, though, be just the ones that would be in Latin America or Canada, I guess? Because I really doubt people living on $1 a day are going to be able to afford to fly to America.
Well, you'd be surprised. So right now there is smuggling of immigrants from countries where people earn $1 a day, where they manage to scrounge up $30,000 to get over here to get smuggled in, right? So that is way more than the price of an airline ticket. But in any case, you just have to imagine how markets would develop if it were legal to come here. There'd be plenty of employers who would be happy to loan you the money. Plenty of employers would be happy to loan you money. They pay $1,000 for airfare, or probably you would actually get discount airfare, like you fly in the middle of the night for half price, right? And you think someone from Bangladesh might be willing to lose a night's sleep in order to save $500 on airfare? Yeah, definitely. All right, so in practice, right now it is really expensive for someone who needs basically to get airfare or boat fare to come here. But if it were actually legal, it would be a very different story, and probably people from all over the globe would be coming here. Right, again, and by the way, so countries where people live on $1 a day, Haiti that comes to mind. So that is probably the one country in the Western Hemisphere where a lot of people live on $1 a day or less. And Tyler Cowan, who's a big collector of Haitian art and an expert on Haitian society, he has basically said that probably Haiti would pretty much empty out if they could come here. Right, so probably it would be something like 10 million Haitians would move to the United States if they could. Okay, so and again, there of course they could just take a very simple boat and be here pretty quickly, right? But again, over the medium term, markets would develop to make it possible for even people in the most remote parts of the world to get here. Let's see, other questions? Let's see, way in the back there.
What would you say to the argument that immigrants are taking the low-cost housing from native homeless people?
See, from native homeless people, or just from low-income people? Yes, from low-income Americans. Yeah. So again, like if that concerns you, then when you go back to the two alternatives to immigration restrictions that I talked about in terms of protecting protecting low-income Americans. So either you charge immigrants an entry fee, or you charge them a surtax in order to compensate Americans who lose because they're being crowded out of low-income housing. That's one alternative. Your other alternative might be to say, why exactly is it that low-income Americans are so special that we should make all this effort to protect them when there's people who earn $1 a day who want to come here and are happy to do the jobs that they don't want to do? Right, that's another thing you could say. Right? So, in terms of justice, I will say, look, someone who dropped out of high school in the United States has so many advantages, it seems to me completely outrageous for them to complain. Right? They were born in this country, they speak native English, they were given a free education, and they're still complaining about immigrants who lacked all these advantages going and making life a little bit harder for them. In my view, that's outrageous, but if you think that it's not outrageous and is a reasonable complaint, then say, fine, we'll let immigrants in, but we'll charge them for it, and then we'll compensate the Americans who are losing out. So you think there was a question up in the front, or let's see, how about here? Ah, there.
Now, all the arguments that you placed in your presentation, regardless of whether anybody believes or disagrees in your arguments, in the event someone says, "Well, it's not my problem if somebody's suffering in Haiti. Why should we let them in the first place?" That's a pretty strong one.
Right, well, let's see. I don't think so, because it's not like we are asking people to donate charity. We're saying you must donate to. We're not telling them that you must donate to charities to help such people. We are merely saying that you need to stand aside and not vote to prevent a landlord who wants to rent them a place from renting it, and an employer who wants to hire them from hiring them. Right, so it's a very big distinction. As many people act as if letting an immigrant in is like charity. It's not like charity. It's like preventing a person from renting an apartment and finding a job. Right, so, and in that case, I think it's very, so you say, look, it's not my problem. I don't have to help you. You're a total stranger. I think that's a reasonable argument. Right? It is not reasonable to say you're a total stranger, therefore I'm going to make it illegal for someone to rent to you, and I'm going to make it illegal for someone to hire you. That seems like it is that is much less than the moral duty that you owe to a total stranger. And again, so the argument of, look, I'm mugging you, that's wrong. No, it's not. You're a stranger. So Nelson might go along with that, but yes. So again, saying that immigrants are somehow a burden on us just by being here seems to me basically as unreasonable as saying, look, they're breathing our air, so they're aggressing against us. Let's see, other questions? Yes.
Has there ever been a study done on the effects on infrastructure? Like, say, there will be more people driving on the roads, there'll be more people using electricity, water?
Mm-hmm. Yes, great question. So there's been a lot. Well, let's see. I don't know about immigration specifically, but there's been a lot of work on the effect of population on infrastructure. Population is great for infrastructure of all kinds, because you wind up averaging the fixed cost of the infrastructure over a larger number of people. Countries with low population densities have very few roads, and therefore there is not much infrastructure to use. In the very short run, of course, when there's more people around, this increases congestion. However, in the long run, what happens is you wind up building more stuff. And as a result, you actually have more options, and your life is actually better. Right? So again, Julian Simon talks about this long run, short run distinction, very well. So he gives this example of, suppose that you're someone who plays squash, so you like playing this game, and then a bunch of more people start showing up at the squash courts, and then you start grumbling about there's too many people around here. Yeah, but if there were no one else who played squash at all, there wouldn't be any squash courts in the first place. And what's going to happen over the longer run if your sport becomes more popular? There's going to be more squash courts all over the place. Right, so in general, actually, if you take a medium or long-run view, more population is good for infrastructure, and it's good for the existence of any product you happen to like, which again is why, in general, people prefer to live in areas with population. Right, so right now, there are some grumbling misanthropes in New York City saying how they hate people, and yet they don't move to Hays, Kansas, where the population density is far lower. Why not? Well, because there's a lot more to do in Manhattan than there is in Hays, Kansas, which is a charming little town with 20,000 people if you look on a map. Okay, but it's charming, but in an afternoon you've run out of stuff to do in Hays. Okay, so people who don't like people live in New York because they like the secondary effects of people. Right? Places with population, there's lots of stuff to do, and that is one of the big benefits of immigration, is they actually increase choice and allow us to spread these fixed costs over a larger number of people. So again, yay immigrants. Or just the last case, take a look at Australia, where so you think, the immigration policy now is considerably more open, but historically much less open in the United States. So they basically have 1/10 of the population, and most of the country's empty. Right? So if you want to go and live in the middle of, like most of Australia, you really can't, because there's no other people there to go and share a grid with you. Let's see, other questions? Yes, right there.
Would you have to advocate the repeal of a minimum wage in order to have a massive number of immigrants who are probably less skilled than $7.25 an hour?
I think that's a great idea. I would say you don't have to do it. The result would be, if you kept the minimum wage and let in a lot of immigrants, then a lot of them would probably wind up working in the black market. Right? So they wind up working illegally. So they'd be here legally, but they would have an illegal job where they get paid less than minimum wage. Right? Or they wind up being unemployed and then they go on welfare. So this would be a very nice complementary policy. Although again, to go and say, sorry, you can't come here because we have a minimum wage, and you might have trouble finding a job, or you might work illegally. Again, that seems to me to be a rather unfair position to take. Saying, look, you guys have a minimum wage, therefore I have to suffer. That seems like, hey, I'm happy to work for a minimum wage, and there's a bunch of people there who won't. So again. It does make things harder, but I'd say, look, the obvious solution is to repeal the minimum wage. Or how about this? Say the minimum wage holds for everyone who is born in this country, right? But not for the non-native workers, and then we just raise the taxes on the non-native workers in order to compensate the new labor aristocracy of low-skilled Americans who won't deign to work for the old minimum wage. Let's see, in the back there. Yes.
What about the argument for the effect that the drug traffic coming, especially across from Mexico, that probably relates to the crime question, but what about that scenario?
Right. So I will not disguise the fact I think drugs should be legalized, and therefore I don't regard this as a serious problem. However, if I were trying to convince people who did not think that, I'd say, fine, well, why don't we go and we'll do what we said, and then we will take all the enforcement that we currently are spending on on immigration restriction and put it over for drug enforcement instead. Right? And you know what? We'll tell you what, we'll also use some of those entry fees and surtaxes to build more and harsher prisons for drug offenders. Right? We could do that too. Right? And I'm against that. However, let me say, I can at least understand the case against letting someone come here and sell drugs that make most people mess up their lives. I cannot understand the case for preventing someone from coming over here and working an honest job. Right? So saying that you're going to prevent someone from working an honest job just seems bizarre and cruel and it's awful in every way. Whereas someone saying, look, I think it's bad for people to use heroin and we should just protect them from themselves, that argument to me doesn't seem nearly as bizarre. So, if we were, we either let in more immigrants and this will lead, and part of that is that we're going to have stricter enforcement of the drug laws. They'll say, like, on net, that would still probably be an improvement.
We have time for one more.
All right, one more question, the most urgent question. Yes, right in the center, in the back there.
How common do you think your views are among economists?
See, among economists, who would actually bite the full bullet, it's probably just 5%. Right? Of course, that's like 100 times as common as they are among the general population. What I would say is, what fraction of economists think that we should have more open immigration than we currently do? And there I'd say probably 80%. Right? In particular, think that the economic benefits of current immigration are positive, and that if we were to say double immigration, those benefits would be positive too. I again say probably like 70, 80% of economists would think that doubling immigration would be not only beneficial, but beneficial to Americans. And if you were to go and add on that we could go and, in place of immigration restrictions, have some other more moderate policies of the kinds that I suggested that to deal with the concerns that people have, then I think I could probably get the immigrants to agree to at least a very large increase, not just a doubling, but tripling or quadrupling. Probably get most economists to go along with that. And the most they would say is, yeah, but you're never going to get people to go and do those other policies. But I'd say, but you agree that what I've suggested would be better than what we have. That's all I want to hear. I'll be satisfied. So, yeah. But again, this is not to say that most economists would go as far as I do, because most economists are also normal Americans. Yes. Am I not a normal American? That's right. I'm not a normal American. I stand outside my society and judge it. Right? Rather than sitting within it and defending it. Right? So I think that's what all thinkers should do. But again, if that's not your cup of tea, then at least if I can get you on board for moderately increasing immigration, I'm happy just to get that. All right. So thanks everyone for attending.